In this video, I will show you how to factor a trinomial using the box method. Now, the first step of any factoring problem is to check and see if there's a common factor. In this case, I see that all terms are divisible by 3. So I'm going to factor out that GCF. So I'm going to bring out the 3, and then if I divide everything by 3, that's going to give me x squared minus 5x plus 6. So my final answer will have this 3 in it. So we'll be careful not to forget about that. So now I'm going to focus on this trinomial. Now throughout this video I'm going to refer to A, B, and C. In this case, A is 1, and then B is -5, and C is 6. So the box method begins with a product and a sum. The product comes from A times C, which in this case is 6. The sum comes from B, which in this case is -5. So I need numbers that will multiply to give me 6 and add to give me -5. So focus on the 6 for a moment. Let's think of all the numbers that we can multiply together to equal 6. So this would be 1 times 6, 2 times 3, and that's it. These are the only ways. Now, which of these can give me -5 if I choose the signs right? Well, actually both of them can. So let's try them one at a time. If I'm going to get -5 out of a 1 and a 6, I would need a +1 and a -6. 1 plus -6 is -5. So that would mean I would have 1 times -6. But 1 times -6 is -6, not +6. So that did not work. So instead, I will use 2 and 3. In order to make -5, both of these would have to be negative. So -2 and also -3. That makes -5. So then in the product, it has to be the same two numbers. So -2 times -3. And guess what? That does equal +6. So these are the numbers that we will use. So now it is time for the box. So just go ahead and make a box something like this. Okay, in the first box you put the first term, which is x squared. In the last box you put the last term, which is 6. In the other two boxes you use the two numbers you just found. So -2 and -3. And these will both be x terms. Next, we find the GCF of each row and each column. So the greatest common factor of the first row is simply x. All right, they both have x in common. The GCF of the bottom row is 2. Both of these are divisible by 2. Because the first term is negative, let's call it a -2. Now let's do the GCF of the first column. Well, they have x's in common. They both have at least one x. Now, for the second column, both of these are divisible by 3. So the GCF is going to be 3. Well, because the first term is negative, let's call it a -3. Now, this will actually give us the answer. Okay. Now, looking at the numbers down the left-hand side, I'm going to have a factor of x minus 2. Looking at the numbers across the top, that's going to give me a factor of x minus 3. And then don't forget about the GCF that we had right at the beginning. That is to be included, and this is the final answer. Okay, so if I were to multiply this all together, it would give me 3x squared minus 15x plus 18. All right, let's move on to problem number 2. Again, your first step is to factor out the GCF if there is one. I see x's everywhere, so I'm going to pull out an x outside of the parentheses. If I divide everything by x, that's going to give me x squared plus 11x plus 10. Okay, so now I will factor this trinomial using the box method. Okay, so the box method begins with a product and a sum. The product comes from A times C. 1 times 10 is 10. The sum comes from the B value, which is 11. Let's start with the product. Okay, focus on this 10. 10 is either going to be 1 times 10 or 2 times 5. And that's it. So, which one of these pairs can give me 11? Well, obviously, that's going to be the 1 times 10 option. Okay, so if I do 1 plus 10, that gives me 11. If I do 1 times 10, that gives me 10. So we've done it. Now, what do I do with this? Well, it's time to make the box that gives the box method its name. Okay, in the first box, you just put the first term, which is x squared. In the last box, you put the last term, which is 10. In the other two boxes, you put the two numbers that you just found, which are 1 and 10. Okay, and these will both be x terms. Now you do the GCF of each row and each column. So the GCF of the first row is x. The GCF of the second row is 1. The GCF of the first column is x. And the GCF of the second column is 10. Okay, so this really gives me the answer. Got to scroll down a little bit. Looking at the first pair over here, this is x plus 1. Okay, just put a little plus in front of there. I got x plus 1. The next factor is across the top. This is x plus 10. And don't forget about the GCF that you pulled out. Okay, let's bring that down. And then this is the final answer. Now I know at the top I told you I was going to show you how to factor a trinomial using the box method. But this is not a trinomial, so we will not be using the box method. But let's see what happens. We always start with the GCF. So 8 and 18 are both divisible by 2. Yeah, that's the GCF between those numbers, 2. I see x's everywhere. The smaller amount is x. So the GCF is going to be 2x. So once I have the GCF, I divide by the GCF. Because that tells me what goes inside the parentheses, which in this case will be 4x squared minus 9. All right, these x's cancel out. Well, I don't need any box method for this because this is the difference of squares. So I guess we're sneaking a little review into this video. The difference of squares, I'm noticing that this is subtraction, or that's what difference means. And these are both perfect squares. 4 is 2 times 2. And then, of course, x squared is x times x. 9 is 3 times 3. And for the difference of squares, we always have 1 plus and 1 minus. And I'm going to bring down the 2x GCF. And this is just simply the final answer. All right, we'll save the box method for trinomials. Again, the first step of any factoring problem is to factor out the GCF. I notice that all of these numbers are divisible by 5. So I'm going to definitely bring that out. They all have x's. The least amount is x, so I'm going to bring that out. So the GCF is 5x. So I'm going to go ahead and divide everything by 5x because that tells me what goes inside the parentheses. So that's going to leave me with x squared minus 8x plus 12. Okay, so now I'm going to focus on factoring this trinomial, and I won't forget about the GCF, which will come back at the end. So time for the box method. So the box method involves a product and a sum. The product comes from multiplying A times C. So 1 times 12, of course, is 12. The sum comes from the B value, which is negative 8. Okay, let's start with the product. So for that, I'm going to start with 12. What times what makes 12? Well, that could be 1 times 12, or 2 times 6, or 3 times 4. Now, which one of these pairs can make negative 8 if I pick the signs right? Hopefully you're thinking, the 2 times the 6. That can make negative 8 if we pick the signs right. Okay, so what do the signs have to be? We would need a negative 2 and a negative 6 to add up to be negative 8. Now, let's see if these numbers work in the product, because we have to use the same numbers. So that would be negative 2 times negative 6, and that is in fact positive 12. So we've done it. All right, next it's time to make the box. So the box will be like this. Okay, now in the first box goes the first term. So that's going to be x squared. In the last box goes the last term. So that's going to be 12. The other two boxes get the two numbers that we just found. So I'll put a negative 2 here and a negative 6 here. And these will both be x terms. So next, what I need to do is find the GCF of each row and each column. The GCF of the first row is x. The GCF of the second row is 2. Well, let's call it negative 2 because the first term is negative. The GCF of the first column is x, and the GCF of the second column is 6. Well, let's call it negative 6 since the first term is negative. So these purple numbers will become the answer. From the left-hand side, I get a factor of x minus 2. Across the top, I get a factor of x minus 6. Bringing down the 5x, I have the final answer. Looking at number 5, right away I see that there is a GCF, like all of these are divisible by 4. So let's go ahead and pull that 4 to the outside and see what we're going to have left. So if I divide everything by 4, which is what's really happening, then that's going to leave me with x squared plus 2x minus 15. Okay? So in our final answer, we're going to have this 4 sitting out front. But go ahead and focus on the red trinomial for the rest of this particular problem. So remember, the box method all starts with a product and a sum. The product comes from A times C. So of course A is 1 and C is negative 15. So that's going to be negative 15. All right, so that was A times C. The sum has to be the B value, which in this case is 2. So let's start with the product. So just focusing on the number 15, that's either going to be 1 times 15 or 3 times 5, and that's it. So which two of these pairs, which one of these pairs will give me a sum of 2 if I pick the signs right? Well, that would have to be the 3 and the 5. And to give me a positive 2, I would need a negative 3 and a positive 5. So it has to be the same numbers for the product, so that would be negative 3 times 5, which is negative 15, so we found what we needed. So now let's go ahead and set up the box for the box method. So we'll just do something like this. Okay, so the first term always goes in the first box, so I'll have x squared here. The last term always goes in the last box, so I'll have negative 15 here. The other two boxes are going to be filled with the two numbers that we just found. So I'm going to have negative 3 and 5, and these will both be x terms. Next you do the GCF. So the GCF of the top row is going to be x. The GCF of the bottom row, well, both of these are divisible by 3, but let's go ahead and call it negative 3 since the first term is negative. Now, the GCF of the first column is x, and the GCF of the second column is 5. So that gives us the two binomials that we will factor with. So this is going to be x minus 3 from the left-hand side, and then we see the x plus 5 across the top. And don't forget about that 4, the GCF from the beginning. That needs to be part of the final answer. So this will be the final answer for problem number 5. All right, for problem number 6, the GCF is going to include numbers and variables. All of these are divisible by 2, so let's go ahead and get that started. All terms have x's. The smallest has 1x, so the GCF is going to be 2x. Then you can go ahead and divide by the GCF. So I'm going to divide everything by 2x to see what goes inside the parentheses. So that's going to leave me with x squared minus 10x minus 24. Okay, so just don't forget, in the end, this GCF should be in the front of your answer. Don't forget about it. But for now, go ahead and focus on the red trinomial, and we're going to do the box method on that. So again, for the box method, we start off with a product and a sum. The product comes from A times C. That's 1 times negative 24. Okay, so that's going to have to equal negative 24. The sum comes from the b value, which is -10. Okay, so let's focus on the product first. So look at that 24. So what multiplies to give you 24? So that would be 1 times 24, or 2 times 12, or 3 times 8, or 4 times 6. And that's it. Now, which one of these pairs will give me -10 if I pick the signs right? Well, I actually see 2 of them that would work. Okay, this pair can give me -10 if I pick the signs right, but so can this pair. So let's be very, very careful. So let's just try them both. If I do the 2 and the 12, the only way I'm going to get -10 is if I have +2 and -12. That would make a sum of -10. But then I have to use the same numbers for the product. So that +2 times -12. And guess what? That does give me -24, which is what I wanted. So we found a winner. So this is what we're going to use. So 4 times 6 wouldn't have worked. To make -10, I could have done -4 and -6. But -4 times -6 would have been +24, which is why that one actually doesn't work. Okay, so let's go ahead with the box method and set up this box. Okay, so we're just looking at the trinomial. The first box always gets the first term. The last box always gets the last term. The other 2 boxes get the 2 numbers that we just found. So 2 and -12. And these will always be x terms. Next, we need to do the GCF of the rows and columns. So the GCF of the top row is going to be x. The GCF of the bottom row is going to be 2. Okay, the GCF of the first column is x. And the GCF of the second column, well, both of these are divisible by 12, but let's go ahead and call it -12 since the first term is negative. Okay, so that gives us 2 binomials. From the left side, we have x plus 2, and from across the top, we have x minus 12. And don't forget the GCF that we pulled out in the very beginning. That is part of your answer. So this is the final answer for problem number 6. Alright guys, that's going to do it for this video. Go ahead and click here in the red apple to watch the next video. Click in the green apple to subscribe, or click the yellow apple for the full playlist.